We know that many of you come to these essays not just to sleep, but because during the day, your mind is too full, too noisy. That's why we create these pieces deep enough for you to feel nourished, yet gentle enough for you to let go. Imagine, if you will, standing at the doorway of a child's bedroom just before dawn. The world outside holds its breath between darkness and light. Through the window, you can see mist clinging to the earth like forgotten dreams, soft and ephemeral. The air carries that particular quality of stillness that exists only in these liminal moments when night prepares to surrender to day, but hasn't quite released its hold. You are the only witness to this threshold, the only one awake in this suspended moment. Your breath makes small clouds in the cool air. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the final call of an owl, that ancient guardian of the night offering its last wisdom before retreating into silence. The floorboards beneath your feet creak softly, and you notice the weight of your own body, the gentle rise and fall of your chest, the way your heart beats its steady rhythm, asking nothing of you, expecting nothing, simply being. In this quiet space, something whispers, not with words exactly, but with a feeling, a question that has lived in you so long, you've stopped hearing it consciously, though you feel its presence in every interaction, every achievement, every moment of doubt. The question asks simply, am I enough? You may look like an adult. You may carry responsibilities, hold titles, wear a face of competence and calm in public. But somewhere deep inside, beneath all the layers of who you've had to become, that small voice still waits for an answer. That question may be so quiet you don't even recognize it as sound anymore. But you feel it. You feel it when someone disapproves of you, and your entire body tenses, muscles tightening, as if preparing for impact. You feel it when you over-explain your choices, over-apologize for your existence, overcompensate for some unnamed deficit you can't quite identify, but are certain must be there. This silent doubt, the one that doesn't quite believe you're enough as you are, didn't start in adulthood. It started when you were small, vulnerable, utterly dependent on others for your very survival. It started when you absorbed, like water into soil, the belief that your worth depended on something outside of you, on being good, being quiet, being successful, being useful, being anything other than simply yourself. Carl Jung, that great explorer of the human psyche, called this wounded part the inner child. And he didn't mean this as a metaphor, some poetic turn of phrase to make psychology more palatable. He understood it as a psychological truth, an actual presence within the architecture of the adult psyche. Within every adult, Jung taught, lives the echo of their earliest experiences. Every moment of love received or withheld. Every instance of being seen or overlooked. Every time safety was present or absent. These experiences don't fade into the past. They live in the present, shaping how we move through the world often, without our conscious awareness. Jung believed that the child archetype is central to the human psyche, and it represents not only innocence and potential, but also the place where many of our deepest wounds reside. In his work on archetypes, Jung described the child as appearing in dreams and myths as the divine child, the vulnerable child, the abandoned child, and the magical child. Each variation carries different psychological meanings, but all point to the same truth. Within every adult psyche lives an eternal child that never fully grows up, that continues to need care, attention, and validation throughout the lifespan. This matters profoundly for our understanding of self-worth in this exploration of psychology for sleep and awakening. Because self-worth is not something you learn to build after you grow up, like acquiring a skill or developing a talent. It's not an achievement to be unlocked or a milestone to be reached. It's something far more fundamental, something you inherit, absorb, and carry from your earliest memories, from those first moments of contact with the world, when you had no defenses, no ability to rationalize or contextualize what was happening to you. Researchers studying infant development have discovered that babies as young as 6 months old can perceive whether they're being seen with delight or dismissed with indifference. Before language, before conscious thought, before any sense of separate identity, we are already absorbing messages about our worth from the emotional atmosphere around us. The infant who is met with consistent warmth, whose cries are answered with presence rather than frustration, whose needs are treated as legitimate rather than burdensome. This infant begins to develop what psychologists call secure attachment, a foundation of trust that says I matter. The world is safe. I am worthy of care. But the infant who experiences inconsistency, whose emotional needs are sometimes met and sometimes ignored, who cannot predict whether reaching out will bring comfort or rejection, this infant begins to develop anxious attachment, a foundation of uncertainty that whispers, I must work hard to keep love. I must be vigilant. My worth is conditional and constantly at risk. And the infant who learns that reaching out brings nothing, that their distress is met with absence or coldness, who must manage their emotional states alone, this infant develops avoidant attachment, a foundation of isolation that insists I must not need anything. Needing is dangerous. I am only safe when I am self-sufficient. These patterns formed before memory, before language, before the child even has a concept of self and other, become the blueprint for all future relationships, including the most important relationship, the one with yourself. And if that foundation was cracked by rejection, neglect, or conditional love, that arrived only when you behaved correctly, performed adequately, or remained conveniently invisible, then even as an adult, even with all your achievements and capabilities, you may find yourself still trying to prove that you matter, still working to earn what should have been freely given, still performing worth instead of embodying it. The psychological literature on this is both extensive and heartbreaking. Studies following children from infancy through adulthood consistently show that early attachment patterns predict not just relationship quality, but self-concept, emotional regulation, and even physical health decades later. The Adverse Childhood Experiences study, one of the largest investigations of childhood trauma ever conducted, found that experiences like emotional neglect, inconsistent care, or growing up in households where love felt conditional create lasting impacts on how individuals perceive their own value. But here's what makes this particularly insidious. Most people with wounded self-worth don't remember the specific moments when the damage occurred. The brain doesn't store implicit emotional memories the same way it stores explicit factual memories. You might not remember being 3 years old and repeatedly told to stop crying, But your nervous system remembers. It remembers at a cellular level that expressing sadness was dangerous, that showing vulnerability led to rejection or punishment. You might not recall the exact instance when your parents' face went cold because you needed attention at an inconvenient time, but some part of you internalized that moment. Some part of you learned, my needs are burdens. I am too much. I should require less to be acceptable. This is the tragedy of early wounding in our journey through psychology, for sleep and transformation. It happens before you have the cognitive capacity to understand or defend against it. You simply absorb it as truth, as reality, as the way things are. And that absorption shapes everything that follows. This is why healing your self-worth isn't about adding more to who you are. It's not about becoming more successful, more attractive, more intelligent, more accomplished. It's about going back. It's about reconnecting with that child, within the one who learned too early that love was conditional. It's about reparenting the parts of you that were never held with enough compassion, never validated in your authentic feelings, never told that you were enough exactly as you were. And ultimately, this work of inner child healing is about integration. It's about bringing what was once lost or buried back into the wholeness of who you are, so that you can stand in the world without pretending to be more or less than your truth, so that you can finally stop performing and start simply being. Consider for a moment how we've arrived at this understanding in our modern era. For most of human history, the suffering of childhood was considered inevitable, even beneficial, something that built character, taught discipline, prepared you for a harsh world. Only in recent centuries have we begun to understand that childhood wounds don't make you stronger. They make you adaptive. They teach you to survive, yes, but often at the cost of your authentic self. We live in a time of unprecedented awareness about psychological health, and yet we also live in a culture that actively perpetuates the wounding of self-worth. We are told constantly that we must optimize, improve, achieve, become our best selves, as if our current selves are somehow insufficient. The very concept of self-improvement can carry within it an implicit message. You are not yet acceptable. Keep working. Keep striving. Maybe then you'll be worthy. This is the peculiar tension of our moment. We have access to more psychological wisdom than any previous generation. Yet we're also subjected to more comparisons, more performance pressure, more opportunities to feel inadequate than ever before. Social media presents us with curated versions of others' lives, creating the illusion that everyone else has figured out how to be worthy, while we alone struggle in secret with that nagging sense of not enoughness. So we return to that image of the threshold, that doorway, between night and day, between sleep and waking, between the self you've constructed and the self you truly are. This is where psychology for sleep becomes something more than a method for rest. It becomes a space for transformation. Because when the world quiets, when the demands cease, when you're finally alone with yourself in the darkness, that's when the truth can emerge. That's when the child within can finally speak. Throughout history, Jung noted, we've been fascinated by this question of wholeness, this search for the integrated self. From ancient philosophers pondering the nature of the soul, to modern neuroscientists mapping the brain's response to early trauma, we've understood that something profound happens in childhood that shapes everything that follows. We will explore how this truth appears across different domains of human knowledge through historical wisdom, archetypal patterns, scientific research, and finally, through the challenging work of personal integration. From ancient wisdom traditions to modern neuroscience, the message remains consistent. You were born whole, and healing is the process of remembering that original completeness. The child within you isn't broken. They're simply waiting to be seen, heard, and welcomed home. Let the world outside continue its slow turn from darkness to light. Here in this space of psychology for sleep, there is no rush, no demand, no need to be anything other than present to what wants to emerge. The journey ahead is long, and that's exactly as it should be, because the deepest healings cannot be rushed. They unfold in their own time like dawn, arriving not all at once but gradually, inevitably bringing light to what has long been hidden in shadow. Take a breath, settle into this moment, and let us begin. No child enters the world believing they are unworthy. This is perhaps the most important truth to understand as we begin this exploration through psychology for sleep. This gentle journey into the origins of the wound that so many carry silently. At birth, we are whole, completely unselfconsciously whole. We cry without shame, announcing our needs to the world with absolute clarity and no apology. We express our hunger, our discomfort, our desire for connection, without any question about whether we deserve to have these needs met. We do not wonder if we are lovable. We do not consider whether we have earned the right to exist. We simply are in the most pure and uncomplicated sense of being. But over time, often subtly, quietly, and without anyone necessarily meaning harm, that natural confidence begins to dim. We start to sense that something about us is too much or not enough. Perhaps we're too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too sensitive, too curious, too needy. And that's when the wound begins to form like a crack in foundation that will later affect the entire structure built upon it. Carl Jung spoke extensively of what he called the child archetype, a central image in the human psyche that appears across cultures and throughout history. This archetype represents not only our vulnerability and helplessness, but also our capacity for growth, creativity, and authentic expression. The child archetype holds our potential, our innocence, and our original nature before the world taught us who we were supposed to be. But when that archetypal child within us is met with rejection, control, neglect, or conditional love, the kind of love that only arrives when we behave correctly, achieve adequately, or remain conveniently small, the child begins to shape their sense of self around what they lack rather than who they are. The message becomes internalized. I am not acceptable as I am. I must become something different to deserve love, safety, and belonging. You may not remember the exact moment it started. Most people don't. The formation of unworthiness is rarely a single traumatic event, though it can be. More often, it's an accumulation of small moments, repeated patterns, consistent messages delivered not necessarily through words, but through emotional atmosphere, through what was present and what was absent in your early environment. Perhaps you remember the feeling, even if you can't recall the specific incidents. That sinking sense when you were scolded for being too exuberant, your natural joy treated as a disruption rather than a gift. The confusion when your needs were met with silence or sighs of exasperation, teaching you that your requirements were burdens. The shame when your mistakes weren't met with understanding and guidance, but with withdrawal of affection, anger, or punishment that felt disproportionate to your transgression. These aren't just memories that fade with time. They become blueprints, templates for how you relate to yourself and the world. Psychologists studying child development have found that these early relational patterns create what are called internal working models, unconscious schemas that shape our expectations about whether we're worthy of care, whether others can be trusted, whether the world is fundamentally safe or threatening. The message wasn't always spoken explicitly, but it was deeply felt and thoroughly absorbed. You're only good if you behave. You're only lovable if you succeed. You're only safe if you stay small, if you don't make waves, if you anticipate others' needs before expressing your own. These conditional experiences of love teach a child that their value is performance-based, not inherent. And when love feels earned rather than given worth, becomes perpetually fragile, always one mistake away from being revoked. This is when the inner split begins, what Jung described as the birth of the shadow. That part of the psyche that holds what we reject, repress, or cannot safely express. To stay close to love, to maintain connection with the caregivers on whom we depend for survival, the child learns to hide certain parts of themselves. The anger gets buried because expressing it brought punishment. The tears are swallowed because showing them led to dismissal or mockery. The questions stop being asked because curiosity was met with irritation rather than engagement. And so, a new self emerges, carefully constructed to maximize acceptance and minimize rejection. This is the version of you that learned to say yes when you wanted to say no. The version that discovered how to read a room to sense others' moods, to adjust your presentation based on what would keep you safest. This adapted self gets praised for being easy, quiet, responsible, mature, beyond your years. And each time you receive that praise, it reinforces the belief that your authentic self, the one underneath the performance, is somehow unacceptable. But while this adapted child learns how to be loved on the surface, something inside begins to feel profoundly abandoned. There's a part of you that remains hidden, unseen, unknown, even to yourself. That abandoned part becomes what Jung called the hidden self, the child who learned to stay quiet about their fears, their desires, their authentic responses to the world. This hidden child carries the burden of shame, that most toxic of emotions. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. And over time, that shame crystallizes into a silent, persistent belief. Maybe I wasn't enough to begin with. Maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with me. Maybe that's why love had to be earned rather than given. Here is where we must pause and understand something crucial in this psychology. For sleep exploration, unworthiness is not a character flaw. It's not evidence that something is wrong with you. It's a wound, a response, a survival adaptation to a world that didn't know how to love all of you, that couldn't hold your fullness, that required you to edit yourself down to a more manageable size. And because this unworthiness was learned, it can be unlearned. Because it was constructed as an adaptation, it can be deconstructed and rebuilt on a foundation of truth rather than fear. But before it can be healed, it must be seen. You have to go back, not to blame anyone or to drown in victimhood, but to understand, to witness what actually happened with adult eyes and adult understanding. Jung offered us a profound insight when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is precisely what happens when the wound of unworthiness remains unexamined. You may think your self-doubt is just part of our personality. You may believe your insecurity is a permanent feature of who you are. You may accept that you'll always struggle with feeling good enough, and you resign yourself to managing it rather than healing it. But beneath that resignation lies the origin story. And understanding that story doesn't excuse current behavior or eliminate personal responsibility. Rather, it provides context. It helps you see that the core driver of so much of your adult struggle isn't weakness or failure. It's a child's brilliant attempt to survive in an environment that couldn't meet their needs. That child who learned to shrink wasn't weak. They were doing everything within their limited power to stay connected, to remain safe, to preserve some sense of belonging in a world where belonging felt conditional. They developed strategies that worked: performing, achieving people-pleasing perfectionism, hypervigilance, emotional caretaking of others while neglecting themselves. These strategies worked until they didn't, until the cost became too high, until you found yourself in adulthood still running the same programs designed for a childhood that ended decades ago. And now, as an adult, you may still be carrying those same survival patterns without realizing it. You overthink before speaking, analyzing every word to avoid saying the wrong thing. You over-apologize, reflexively taking responsibility, even when you've done nothing wrong. You overwork, driven not by genuine passion, but by a gnawing fear that if you stop producing, you'll lose value. You overfunction in relationships, giving far more than you receive, because somewhere inside, you still believe that your worth is measured by your usefulness to others. You don't realize that the core driver isn't ambition or humility or conscientiousness. The core driver is fear. Fear of being seen for who you truly are and not being accepted. Fear that if you stop performing, the love will disappear. Fear that your authentic self, the one with needs, with limits, with imperfections, is somehow unlovable. This is where the healing begins, right here, in this moment of recognition. Not with self-criticism for having these patterns, but with compassionate awareness. You begin to ask, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a genuine inquiry. Where did I first learn I wasn't enough? When did I start believing that love had to be earned? And when you listen, not just with your analytical mind, but with your whole being, with the kind of gentle attention you might offer a frightened child, you'll hear the voice of that younger self again, the one who never needed to change but needed to feel safe being exactly as they were. The one who would have thrived with presence, patience, and unconditional positive regard. Unworthiness is not your truth. It never was. It is your story, a narrative that was written when you were too young to understand that love should never have had conditions attached. The people who raised you were likely doing their best with the tools they had, carrying their own wounds from their own childhoods, perpetuating patterns they never chose but inherited nonetheless. But now you're here. Now you're old enough to choose again. Old enough to recognize that you've been living according to a story that was never true, only convincing. and you get to write a new story now. One where the child inside isn't silenced. One where you are no longer split between who you are and who you think you need to be to deserve love. You didn't fail to become enough. The world failed to show you that you already were. From your very first breath, from the moment you entered existence, your worth was complete. Not because of what you might achieve, not because of how well you might perform, but simply because you are. Because consciousness itself is inherently valuable. Because your existence is unrepeatable and irreplaceable. And now it's your turn to show that abandoned child within something different. Not by becoming better, not by achieving more, not by finally fixing all your flaws, but by turning inward with presence, with tenderness, and offering what was missing all along. You are safe with me, you can tell them. You matter. I see you. And you never had to earn my love. It was always yours. It will always be yours. This is the beginning of reclaiming your worth. This is the beginning of coming home to yourself. And in this space of psychology for sleep, in this quiet darkness where the world cannot see you and you cannot see yourself in any mirror, you can finally stop performing. You can finally be still enough to hear that child's voice. You can finally offer them what they've been waiting for all this time. Not rescue from the outside, but recognition from within. Let these words settle into you like water into earth. There's no hurry. The child has been waiting this long. They can wait a little longer while you gather the courage to truly see them. But know this, they are there, they have always been there, and they are ready when you are. You can grow up, you can move out of your childhood home, establish a career, build a life that looks stable and successful from the outside. You can accumulate all the markers of adulthood, financial independence, professional titles, adult relationships, responsibilities that you handle with seeming competence. But if your inner child is still hurting, still waiting for the safety that never came, still wondering at a fundamental level whether they're enough, then no amount of outward success will translate into inner peace. Because when the child within never truly healed, they don't disappear. They don't grow up just because your body did. Instead, they quietly, unconsciously take the wheel. Carl Jung spoke extensively of emotional patterns that live beneath our awareness, what he called complexes. These are not simple habits or personality quirks that you can change through willpower or positive thinking. They are clusters of memory, emotion, and belief formed around early wounds and activated in the present whenever something reminds the psyche of the original injury. Think of complexes like psychological landmines buried in the landscape of your unconscious. You're walking through your adult life, managing responsibilities, making decisions, interacting with others, and suddenly, boom, you step on one. An innocent comment triggers a disproportionate emotional response. A small rejection activates a flood of shame. A minor conflict sends you into freeze mode. These aren't character flaws. These are complexes activating, pulling you back to the emotional state of the child who first experienced that particular flavor of pain. Jung described how complexes have a strange autonomy, almost like separate personalities within the psyche. When a complex is activated, it's as if you're temporarily taken over by that younger part of yourself. You might hear yourself speaking in ways that don't feel like your adult self, more reactive, more defensive, more desperate. You might notice yourself behaving in ways you wouldn't rationally choose, apologizing excessively, people pleasing, frantically, withdrawing completely. That's because in those moments, you're not operating from your adult consciousness. You're being run by the complex, by the wounded child who is trying to protect you from reliving an old pain. The child who learned that certain situations meant danger and who developed specific strategies to stay safe. Even when we're not consciously thinking about childhood, these complexes shape our reactions, our choices, our entire way of moving through the world. They operate like invisible puppet strings, pulling us into familiar patterns, even when those patterns no longer serve us, even when they actively harm us. The inner child lives inside these patterns, not in chronological age or logical thought, but in emotion, in bodily sensation, in the sudden wave of shame that washes over you when you're misunderstood, in the panic that floods your chest when you feel excluded from a social situation, in the deep fatigue that settles in after you've spent an entire day performing the version of yourself you think others expect to see. You may not realize it in the moment, but the child within often makes your adult decisions. Not directly, not consciously, but in the way certain situations trigger old emotional programs that run automatically like software installed. So long ago, you've forgotten it's even there. This is why you seek approval from people who rarely give it unconsciously, choosing the unavailable person to finally win over, recreating the dynamic of trying to earn love from an emotionally distant parent. This is why you chase perfection, not because you love excellence, but because mistakes once cost you connection. And some part of you still believes that being flawless is the only way to remain safe. This is why you overextend yourself, agreeing to commitments you don't have energy for, afraid that setting a boundary will result in rejection or abandonment. The patterns don't originate from your adult wisdom. They emanate from a younger version of you still trying to solve an impossible puzzle. How do I get the love I need while also being who I am? And because that puzzle was never solvable, because the problem wasn't you, but the environment's inability to meet your needs, you're still trying to solve it decades later with the same strategies that didn't work then and won't work now. In the field of psychology for sleep and therapeutic work, we've come to understand that the wounded child doesn't speak in words. They speak in behaviors. They communicate through the body's reactions, through inexplicable anxiety, through self-sabotage that seems to come from nowhere. You people please not because you're naturally agreeable or kind, but because you learned early that pleasing others was the safest way to belong, the most reliable method to avoid punishment or emotional abandonment. You become a perfectionist, not because you genuinely love achievement, but because errors once brought shame, criticism, or the withdrawal of approval, and some primitive part of your nervous system still experiences mistakes as existential threats. You procrastinate on important projects while handling everyone else's needs, not because you're lazy or disorganized, but because somewhere deep down, you don't fully believe you deserve success, ease, or the spotlight that comes with accomplishment. Or perhaps because succeeding would require you to be seen. And being seen feels dangerous when you learn that visibility brought criticism. These patterns often feel automatic, arising faster than conscious thought. You find yourself reacting in ways you can't quite explain, even to yourself. Someone criticizes your work, and suddenly you're flooded with emotion that feels disproportionate to the situation. Logically, you know it's just feedback, but your body responds as if you're being rejected entirely, as if this one critique confirms the deepest fear that you're not good enough and never were. Or someone raises their voice, not even at you, but near you, and your entire system goes into freeze mode. You shut down, go quiet, become small. You're not choosing this response. It's arising from an ancient place, from a time when conflict meant danger, when anger in the environment signaled that safety had evaporated. Or you start to say no to a request that will drain your already depleted energy, but the word catches in your throat. Your chest tightens. Anxiety floods your body, and before you've consciously decided anything, you hear yourself saying, yes, agreeing to something you don't want to do, abandoning your own needs once again. That's not weakness. That's a memory coded into your nervous system, pulling you back to a time when saying no wasn't an option, when protecting your boundaries meant risking the love you desperately needed. This is what Jung meant when he wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You'll think, why do I always end up in this situation? Why do I always feel this way? Why do I keep choosing people who can't really see me? Why do I sabotage myself? Right, when things are going well. And the answer, more often than not, is that the child within hasn't been given the space to speak, to heal, to finally grow up alongside you. They're still operating from the old rules, the survival strategies that made sense when you were 5 or 8 or 13, but make no sense at all now. Here's what makes this particularly challenging. The child didn't get the developmental tools to process complex feelings. They weren't taught that their needs were inherently valid and deserving of respect. They weren't shown that mistakes are part of learning rather than evidence of unworthiness. So they built the best solutions they could with their limited resources. They learned to put on masks to perform the version of themselves most likely to be accepted. They figured out how to be liked, how to keep the peace, how to disappear when things got hard. They discovered which emotions were acceptable and which had to be hidden. They developed an exquisite sensitivity to others' moods, becoming expert at reading the emotional atmosphere and adjusting accordingly, often at the expense of their own feelings and needs. Those strategies may have kept you emotionally safe when you were young, but as an adult, they often cost you your voice, your energy, your authenticity, and your connection to your real self. They create a life that looks fine from the outside, but feels hollow from within, because you're not actually living. You're performing, managing, controlling, trying to prevent the abandonment that your nervous system still fears is imminent. Think about this deeply. If a child believes they are fundamentally unworthy, what kind of adult do they become? They become someone who overcompensates endlessly, working twice as hard to prove their value. They become someone who stays in roles, relationships, and situations they've long outgrown because leaving would mean admitting that what they've invested so much in wasn't right for them. which feels like another failure. They become someone who performs strength but feels profoundly fragile. Inside, convinced that if anyone saw beneath the surface, they'd see the inadequacy that's been there all along. The wound doesn't vanish with age. It doesn't disappear because you got a degree, a promotion, a partner, or children of your own. It simply changes form, finding new ways to express itself through adult circumstances. Sometimes you can tell the inner child has taken over when your reaction doesn't match the moment at all. A colleague offers mild criticism, and you spend the next 3 days ruminating, unable to sleep, replaying the interaction, spiraling into shame. A friend doesn't respond to your text for a few hours, and suddenly you're convinced they're angry, that you've done something wrong, that the relationship is ending. Someone makes a small mistake that affects you, and you can't bring yourself to address it directly because conflict feels too dangerous. So you swallow your frustration and add it to the growing resentment you carry. That's not your adult self responding. That's the emotional memory of the child saying, "This is not safe. I am not safe. I must fix this immediately, or I will lose love, connection, belonging, all the things I cannot survive without." This is why healing is not just about gaining insight. Understanding why you react this way is useful, certainly, but understanding alone doesn't stop the pattern. You can know intellectually that your worth isn't dependent on others' approval, while still feeling devastated when someone disapproves. You can understand cognitively that mistakes don't make you unworthy, while still experiencing crippling shame when you make an error. The healing requires something deeper. It requires building a relationship with the part of you that still carries the wound. You have to sit with the child inside, who is still trying desperately to control every interaction to prevent getting hurt again. You have to meet the part of you that believes with a child's concrete logic that if you can just make everyone happy, you'll finally be safe. That inner child may feel like a saboteur, like the part of you that ruins things just when they're going well. But they're not trying to destroy your life. They're trying to protect you the only way they know how, using outdated childlike logic that made sense in the past, but no longer serves you in the present. The logic goes something like this: if I just make everyone happy, I'll be safe. If I never need anything, no one can reject me for being too much. If I stay invisible, I can't be criticized or hurt. If I achieve enough, maybe I'll finally feel valuable. If I'm perfect, they can't find a flaw that proves I'm unworthy. So here's the invitation, offered gently in this space of psychology for SLEP, where we can be honest about what we usually hide. When you feel triggered, anxious, ashamed, or suddenly very small, despite being a capable adult, don't shame yourself for being reactive or sensitive. Instead, pause, take a breath, and ask, who's speaking right now? What part of me has been activated? What does this part need? What old memory is trying to protect me from being relived? Carl Jung didn't see the child archetype as weak or something to be eliminated. He saw it as powerful, symbolic, and central to who we are. But when that child is hurt and remains unseen, unheard, and unintegrated, their influence turns inward. They don't destroy us, but they do keep us stuck in cycles of self-doubt, in patterns of over-giving while under-receiving, in loops of chasing love while secretly believing we don't truly deserve it. And if we don't slow down and notice these patterns, if we don't turn toward the child within with curiosity instead of criticism, we will keep playing out the same stories over and over. We'll keep choosing relationships where we have to earn love. We'll keep pushing ourselves past exhaustion to prove our value. We'll keep shrinking in rooms where we should be expanding, all without realizing that we're simply reenacting scripts written before we even had words for what was happening to us. But once you become aware, everything can shift. Not overnight, not perfectly, not without effort, but genuinely, progressively, transformatively. You don't have to abandon the inner child. You don't have to silence their fears or override their needs. You simply have to let them know you don't have to run the show anymore. I'm here now. I'm the adult. I'm safe. I'm listening. And we're gonna figure this out together. Because healing doesn't mean erasing the past or pretending the wound never happened. It means bringing love and presence to the places that never received them. It means offering the child within what they needed all along, to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, not for what they did, but for who they were. And the moment you begin to tend to that child with genuine compassion, you take back the steering wheel from survival mode. You return to the part of you that can choose consciously rather than react automatically. You shift from being controlled by old patterns to being guided by present awareness and adult wisdom. You begin to live from your whole self, not just from the wounded, adapted performing self. And in that wholeness, something profound becomes possible. You stop being the child trying to earn love from a world that feels perpetually withholding. You become the adult who can finally offer that child what no one else ever could: unconditional presence, unwavering acceptance, and the revolutionary message that they never had to earn anything. They were always, from the very beginning, inherently worthy of love. At some point in life, most of us become performers. Not in the theatrical sense, though. The parallel is apt. We learn to perform emotionally carefully, constructing a version of ourselves that earns approval, deflects judgment, and minimizes rejection. We develop roles: the competent professional, the good friend, the helpful family member, the strong one who doesn't need support, the easygoing one who never makes waves. These roles aren't entirely false. They're adaptive. They're functional. They help us navigate the complex social expectations of family, workplace culture, and relationships. Carl Jung gave this carefully constructed version of the self a name: the persona. Taken from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in classical theater, the persona is the face we show to the world, the version of ourselves we present to meet external expectations and fulfill social roles. Jung was careful to note that the persona serves an important function. In his autobiography, he wrote about his own struggle with persona development, describing how he learned early on to present different versions of himself in different contexts. He called this his number one and number two personalities, the socially adapted self versus the inner, more authentic self. This splitting, he realized, was universal. We all construct personas out of necessity. The question is not whether we have a persona we must to function in society, but whether we know we're wearing a mask, and whether we can take it off when we're alone or in truly intimate spaces. The persona isn't inherently problematic. In fact, it's necessary for social functioning. We all need some capacity to modulate our expression depending on context. The way you speak in a job interview differs from how you talk with your closest friend. The version of yourself you present in a professional email is not identical to the version that emerges when you're alone at home. This capacity for appropriate self-modulation is healthy, even sophisticated. But the problem arises when the persona becomes fused with your identity, when the performance becomes so ingrained, so automatic, so seamless, that you lose touch with who you actually are beneath it. When the mask fits so tightly for so long that you forget you're wearing it. When you can no longer distinguish between the role you play and the person you are. Jung warned about this danger specifically. He observed patients who had become so identified with their personas. The successful businessman, the devoted mother, the strong soldier, the perfect student, that they experienced devastating psychological crises when life circumstances forced them to drop the mask. Retirement empty nest syndrome, injury, or failure could trigger complete identity collapse in those who had no sense of self beneath the role they'd been playing. This is what Jung meant by persona identification, mistaking the mask for the face, the role for the reality. And it's particularly dangerous because our culture actively encourages this confusion. We're praised for being good at our roles, rewarded for seamless performance, admired for appearing to have it all together. The better you wear the mask, the more success you typically achieve, which reinforces the belief that the mask is who you should be. Some personas look like confidence, competence, achievement control. Others look like endless kindness that never sets boundaries, strength that never admits vulnerability, productivity that never permits rest. Whatever form it takes, the persona is fundamentally a shield. It says, if I show you this version of me, you won't see the parts I'm still ashamed of. You won't see the child who was once made to feel like a burden, like too much, like not enough. This is where the conflict deepens in our exploration through psychology for sleep. Because while the persona faces outward, engaging with the world, the inner child remains tucked beneath it, hidden from view, still feeling invisible, still unheard, still carrying the belief that their authentic self is somehow unacceptable. The more polished the persona becomes, the more neglected the inner child feels. It's as if you build increasingly sophisticated armor to protect your soft center, but in doing so, you also prevent that tender core from receiving nourishment, from being touched by genuine connection, from experiencing the very acceptance it craves. And deep down, something begins to fracture. You might find yourself exhausted after social interactions that require you to be on, even when those interactions appear successful from the outside. You might feel strangely disconnected even when you're being praised as if the compliments are landing on the persona, but never reaching the real you underneath. You might notice that, despite looking like you have it all together, despite everyone thinking you're doing so well, something still feels hollow. That's not ingratitude or a dysfunction. That's a signal. It's the inner child quietly asking, when is it my turn to be real? When do I get to stop performing? Jung taught that healing involves a process he called individuation, becoming whole by integrating the hidden and fragmented parts of the self. And that means courageously looking at what we've concealed behind the persona. Because underneath every carefully curated image is something raw and true, the part of us that didn't need to impress or prove anything to be worthy of love. The part of us that once cried freely without apologizing for our tears. That dreamed wildly without censoring our visions. That expressed our feelings without first calculating whether they were acceptable. That part still exists. But if your early life taught you that authenticity was unsafe, that being real brought criticism or rejection, then you learn to protect that tender core with performance. You learn to smile when you were hurt and to say, I'm fine. When you weren't, to appear strong when you felt fragile. You learn to be agreeable when you were angry, to seem confident when you were terrified, to act unaffected when you were devastated. And that performance helped you survive. It kept you safe. It allowed you to maintain connection even when being authentic felt too risky. But now that same mask that once protected you has become a prison. It keeps you safe from rejection, yes, but it also keeps you from being truly seen. And if you're always performing, if you're always managing your image, if you're always monitoring how you're being perceived, then no matter how much love or admiration you receive, it will never quite reach the part of you that needs it most. Because the real you, the one behind the mask, is still in hiding, still waiting, still hoping that someday it will be safe enough to emerge. Jung wrote something that penetrates to the heart of this dilemma. You cannot truly love yourself if you've never met your real self. That statement deserves to be felt, not just understood intellectually. How can you genuinely value yourself when the self you're presenting isn't fully authentic? How can you feel worthy when you're constantly editing, filtering, performing? The persona might earn respect, admiration, even affection. But it will never feel like true belonging. Because belonging requires being known. And you cannot be known if you're always hidden behind a role. When you begin to notice your persona, when you start to recognize the gap between who you are and who you present yourself to be, you naturally begin asking questions. Who am I when I'm not trying to impress anyone? Who am I when I'm not performing strength or competence or likability? Who am I when I don't need to be perfect? These questions can feel terrifying at first because you might not know the answers immediately. You may have worn the mask for so long, perhaps since childhood, that you've forgotten what your own face looks like underneath. You might feel like you've been the good one, the strong one, the responsible one, the helper for so long that you don't remember who you are when you're not fulfilling those roles. That's okay. That uncertainty is actually the beginning of something important. The goal isn't to rip off the mask violently, all at once shocking yourself and everyone around you. The goal is to slowly, gently, compassionately peel back the layers until the person beneath feels safe enough to step forward. You begin to reconnect with the child inside the one who existed before the performance began. You invite their voice into the room. You say internally, you don't have to hide anymore. I'm here. I'm listening. You don't have to be good to be loved. You just have to be real. And in that moment, something powerful begins to happen. The persona loosens its grip. The pressure to perform starts to fade. The exhausting work of constant self-monitoring begins to ease. You may still show up in the world with strength and grace, with competence and kindness, But now it comes from authenticity rather than from fear. It arises from wholeness rather than from a desperate need to hide your perceived inadequacies. You no longer need to overcompensate for a wound you're finally allowing yourself to acknowledge and tend. It's tempting to think we'll be loved only if we keep our struggles hidden, only if we maintain the illusion of having it all together. But the deeper truth, the one that this journey through psychology for sleep invites you to consider, is this: you can't receive real love until you show up as your real self. The mask might earn admiration, it might even generate affection, but it will never create genuine belonging because only your true self can feel truly accepted. The persona might get praised, but the child within will remain lonely, still waiting for someone to see past the performance to the authentic person underneath. So take a moment now and ask yourself gently, not critically, not judgmentally, but with genuine curiosity: what am I hiding behind? What role am I playing that no longer feels true? Where in my life am I performing instead of connecting? Where am I showing the mask instead of the face? The answers won't arrive all at once, and that's appropriate. This isn't about sudden revelation, it's about gradual recognition, patient excavation of what's been buried. But each time you meet yourself without judgment, each time you sit with your truth instead of covering it with performance, you reclaim a piece of your self-worth. Not the kind of worth that depends on applause or achievement, not the fragile worth that crumbles under criticism, but the solid, unshakable worth that comes from authenticity, from showing up as you actually are, rather than as you think you should be. And this is precisely what the inner child has been waiting for all along. Not perfection, not performance, not the carefully constructed version of you that never makes mistakes, or has needs, or shows vulnerability. What they've been waiting for is presence, the quiet knowing that they are allowed to exist as they are, without earning love, without hiding pain, without performing worth, that they don't have to keep secrets about their struggles, that they don't have to pretend to be stronger than they feel, that they can be seen in their wholeness, the light and the shadow, the strength and the vulnerability, the competence and the confusion, and still be accepted. Your persona may have helped you survive. It may have protected you from judgment, from rejection, from the pain of being seen and found wanting. But only your real self can help you actually live. Only your authentic self can experience genuine connection. Only the child within, finally allowed to be real, can know what it feels like to be loved for who you truly are, rather than for how well you perform. At first, it looks like ambition. It appears to be drive, determination, high standards. It manifests as endless effort, constant striving, perpetual improvement. You call it motivation, discipline, commitment to excellence. But underneath it all, if you pause long enough to look beneath the surface, you may find something else entirely. Something quieter, more tender, more heartbreaking. A child who still believes that if they can just do enough, be enough, achieve enough, fix enough, then maybe finally they'll be worthy of love. Carl Jung understood this hunger for validation, not as vanity or narcissism, but as the soul's attempt to heal something unspoken, to fill a void created in early life when the child's inherent worth was somehow called into question. When the inner child feels unseen, or unheard in their formative years, they grow up finding ways to be noticed, to matter, to prove their value. Jung wrote about what he called the unlived life, the ways in which we often spend our energy trying to live up to others' expectations, rather than discovering and fulfilling our own authentic potential. He observed that many of his patients, particularly those in midlife crisis, had achieved everything they were supposed to achieve: the career, the family, the status, yet felt profoundly empty because none of it was truly theirs. They'd been living someone else's script, performing someone else's version of success. And underneath that performance was usually a wounded child, still trying to win approval from parents who could never give it, still trying to prove worthiness to an internalized critic who would never be satisfied, still seeking external validation because the internal foundation of self-worth was never properly established. This manifests in what contemporary psychology calls external locus of control, the belief that your worth, your emotional state, your sense of okayness depends primarily on factors outside yourself, on what others think, on what you achieve, on how you compare. The inner child who never learned that they were inherently valuable develops into an adult who constantly looks outward for confirmation of worth, never realizing that no amount of external validation can fill an internal void. And they pursue this validation through every means available, through success and achievement, through being needed and helpful, through control and perfectionism, through gaining admiration and approval. Not because they crave power or prestige for its own sake, but because they crave presence, the basic human need to be seen, acknowledged, valued for who they are, rather than what they do. What makes this pattern so insidious is that many people never even realize they're caught in it. The pursuit of external validation becomes so normalized, so automatic, so thoroughly woven into the fabric of daily life that it feels like just who you are. You're ambitious. You're a high achiever. You're someone who cares about doing things well. You're helpful, responsible, someone people can count on. But over time, something begins to shift. That validation stops feeling fulfilling. You can reach milestone after milestone, accumulate praise and recognition, earn promotions and accolades, even receive love from others, and still feel a gnawing emptiness inside. Still feel like you're running on a treadmill that never actually takes you anywhere, never delivers the lasting sense of security you're seeking. Because what the child within is really seeking isn't admiration, it's acknowledgement. And there's a subtle but profoundly important difference between these two experiences. Admiration says, "You're impressive. Look at what you've accomplished." Acknowledgement says, "I see you. I see who you are, not just what you do." The first feeds the ego, creates a temporary high, requires constant reinforcement. The second nourishes the soul, creates lasting security, builds genuine self-worth. The inner child doesn't want to be clapped for. They want to be seen, especially in the moments when they're not shining, especially in the struggle, the confusion, the vulnerability, especially when they're scared, uncertain, or in pain. And if you never received that kind of presence growing up, if your early environment was one where love felt conditional upon performance, where attention came primarily when you succeeded or behaved correctly, then you likely internalized a devastating belief that you need to earn love by being good, successful, useful, or exceptional. You may have learned that your feelings were inconvenient, that your needs were burdens, that your imperfections made you less lovable. So you adapted. You built your entire life around achieving things, proving things, earning things, hoping that the next accomplishment would finally fill the space where unconditional love should have lived. And this is how so many of us end up trapped in what feels like endless loops in this journey through psychology for sleep and waking life alike. We keep chasing something we can't quite name. We keep hoping that the next achievement, the next relationship, milestone, the next external validation will make us feel fundamentally secure, finally worthy. But the feeling never lasts. You get the promotion, and within days you're anxious about the next level. You receive the compliment, and immediately you're wondering if they really meant it, or were just being polite. You achieve the goal you've been working toward, and instead of satisfaction, you feel empty. Already looking toward the next thing that might finally make you enough. The cycle continues because the real issue isn't external. It's the internal belief system that says, until I become more, I'm not enough. Until I fix this flaw, heal this wound, achieve this goal, I don't deserve to feel worthy. This is the wounded child's fundamental illusion. The lie they absorbed so early it feels like truth. If I just try harder, if I just fix myself, if I just become better, then I'll finally be acceptable. Then love will be safe. Then I can rest. But the more you chase it, the further you drift from yourself. The more you perform, the more exhausted you become. The more you achieve, the more pressure you feel to maintain the image. And the real you, the one underneath all the striving, gets buried deeper and deeper under the weight of what you think you need to become. Jung believed we often unconsciously recreate the past in an attempt to resolve unfinished emotional business. He described this as the repetition of psychological patterns, what many contemporary therapists now call reenactments. And one of the most heartbreaking patterns is this. We find ourselves drawn to people, environments, and situations that mirror the emotional climate of our early life, not because they're healthy or fulfilling, but because they're familiar. We gravitate toward what we know, even when what we know hurt us. So you find yourself working for approval from emotionally distant people, trying to win over the person who barely sees you, unconsciously recreating the dynamic of trying to earn love from a parent who was physically present but emotionally unavailable. You find yourself in relationships where affection feels conditional, where you have to maintain a certain image or meet certain expectations to receive warmth and connection unconsciously, repeating the pattern of conditional love you experienced in childhood. You find yourself in roles that drain you, positions where your value is measured entirely by your productivity and usefulness, unconsciously seeking praise from systems that mirror the transactional nature of your earliest relationships. Why? Because something inside is still trying to win the love it never got, still trying to prove that you are enough, still hoping that if you just get it right this time, if you just perform well enough in this relationship, or this job, or this achievement, you'll finally receive the unconditional acceptance you needed all along. But here's the truth, that this exploration through psychology for sleep wants you to hear. You can't heal an old wound by reenacting it. You can't fill a childhood void by earning validation from someone who doesn't truly see you from a system that can never give you what you need. You don't need another person to say you're enough. You need to believe it in your own body, to know it in your nervous system, to feel it as a lived reality rather than an intellectual concept. And that begins by recognizing the real need underneath all the striving. The inner child doesn't want applause. They want presence, not attention that comes with conditions, not praise that has to be earned, but the kind of connection that says, you don't need to do anything to deserve this moment. I'm with you as you are. That kind of presence can only come from within. No external achievement will ever provide it. No amount of validation from others will substitute for it. It has to be something you give yourself. And it begins with what psychologists call reparenting, the process of offering yourself the very things you were missing. Not once, not perfectly, but consistently, gently, with genuine care. You start by noticing the moments when you're seeking approval. And instead of shaming yourself for being needy or insecure, you pause and ask, what am I hoping this person's praise will give me? What part of me still feels unseen? What do I actually need right now, beneath the desire for validation? And you respond to that part, not with more doing, but with being. Not with more achieving, but with presence. You say to the child within, I see you trying so hard. I see you wanting to be loved, wanting to matter, wanting to feel secure. And I need you to know something. You don't have to prove anything right now. You get to rest. You're already enough. This practice of self-acknowledgement begins to shift everything. Validation stops being about chasing external approval and becomes about returning to the truth that you were always worthy, that nothing you do or don't do can fundamentally alter your inherent value as a human being. You stop performing love and start practicing self-acceptance. You stop trying to fix yourself into worthiness and start being with yourself as you are. And slowly, incrementally, the exhausting loop begins to break. You may still hear echoes of that old voice, the one that says, try harder, be better. Don't mess up. Don't let them see your weakness. Keep going. Keep proving. But now you can answer it with a new voice, a steadier voice, a voice rooted in compassion rather than criticism. Even when you're not perfect, I'm still here. Even when you feel lost or confused or inadequate, you still belong to yourself, in yourself, as yourself. This is how you begin to rewire the emotional pattern that has controlled so much of your life. Not by demanding silence from the wounded child, but by finally giving them the safety to speak. Not by pushing them away or shaming them for their needs, but by listening with genuine care to what they're trying to tell you. And when you do, when you truly listen, when you offer presence instead of performance, you may hear something you haven't heard clearly in years, the sound of your real self coming back to life, the voice that knows what you actually want, not what you think you should want, the instinct that can sense what's right for you, not what others expect, the inner knowing that has been there all along, waiting beneath the noise of seeking validation. Because when the inner child stops chasing external approval and starts receiving internal presence, something fundamental softens. The frantic quality of proving yourself begins to ease. The constant vigilance about others' opinions starts to quiet. You no longer need to beg to be seen because you're seeing yourself. You no longer need to prove your worth through exhaustion because you're learning to know your worth as a given. You simply begin to inhabit your own life with more gentleness, more honesty, more freedom than you thought possible. And that's not the end of the healing journey, but it is the beginning of a new way of being, a way where the child inside no longer has to ask desperately, "Am I enough?" Because finally, at long last, the answer is already known, already felt, already lived as truth. Yes, you always were from the very beginning, before you did anything or became anything, you already were. There comes a moment in every healing journey when you realize, perhaps gradually, perhaps in a sudden wave of clarity, that no one is coming to rescue the child within you, not the people who wounded you, who were themselves wounded and passing on patterns they never chose, not the ones who ignored your needs because they couldn't see past their own pain, not even the people who loved you but didn't know how to see the real you, how to hold your fullness, how to give you the unconditional acceptance every child deserves. The truth, difficult and liberating in equal measure, is this: your healing doesn't come from being reparented by the world. It comes from becoming the parent you always needed. This is where Carl Jung's wisdom becomes not just philosophical, but immediately practical. He wrote, "In every adult there lurks a child, an eternal child. Something that is always becoming, is never completed, and calls for unceasing care, attention, and education. That is the part of the personality which wants to develop and become whole. That care, that attention, that patient education must now come from you. This is the work of awakening the inner parent, not the critical, harsh, demanding parent that many of us internalized from our early experiences, but the wise, compassionate, steady presence that creates safety for the wounded child within. This concept of reparenting has deep roots in psychological theory. Donald Winnicott, the British psychoanalyst, wrote about the good enough mother, not a perfect parent, but one who provides sufficient attunement, responsiveness, and safety for the child to develop a secure sense of self. When that good enough parenting was absent or inconsistent, the adult must learn to provide it for themselves. More recently, internal family systems therapy has formalized this process, teaching people to access what founder Richard Schwartz calls self-energy, a compassionate, curious, calm presence that can hold space for all the wounded parts of the psyche. This is the inner parent not controlling or fixing, but witnessing, accepting, and caring. Reparenting in the context of psychology, for sleep and awakened transformation, works at multiple levels simultaneously. Neurobiologically, you're actually rewiring neural pathways through consistent self-compassion, creating new patterns that override the old stress response patterns formed in childhood. Psychologically, you're developing secure attachment with yourself, learning that you can be a reliable source of comfort and validation. Spiritually, you're reclaiming authority over your own life, no longer giving your power away to external validators. Awakening the inner parent through this practice is not about scolding yourself into growth or pushing through your feelings with discipline and willpower. It's not about being tougher on yourself or maintaining even higher standards than you already have. You've likely already tried that approach for years or decades, and it doesn't heal the wound, it often deepens it, creating another layer of shame about not being able to fix yourself through force of will. Instead, this is about learning to show up for yourself with the kind of warmth and consistency that your younger self once craved but didn't receive. It's about becoming for yourself what you needed others to be. Most of us didn't need perfect parents. We needed safe ones. We needed someone who could sit beside us in our fear without rushing us to get over it. Someone who wouldn't punish our sadness with silence or our anger with shame. Someone who could remind us through their steadiness that we were not too much and never not enough. When you awaken the inner parent, you begin to do precisely that. You start speaking to yourself differently, not as the critic who points out every flaw and failure, not as the judge who condemns you for not being further along, but as the comforter, the protector, the one who sees you completely and loves you anyway. You replace that harsh inner monologue, the one that asks, "What's wrong with you?" whenever you struggle with one that whispers, "Of course you feel this way. This makes sense given what you experienced. I'm here with you." And that one change, that single shift from condemnation to compassion, begins to rewire your nervous system. It begins to soften the places that were hardened by years of self-criticism and survival. It begins to restore trust in yourself, in your own ability to meet your needs, to care for your emotional well-being. In reparenting work, safety is the foundation. Everything else builds from there. You have to ask yourself honestly, does my inner world feel like a place where I can bring my truth? Can I show up internally as I actually am? Confused, hurting, angry, scared, uncertain, without being met with judgment or dismissal? If the answer is no, if your inner world feels as conditional and critical as your outer world once did, then it's time to create that safety consciously and deliberately. This creation of internal safety happens through small, repeated actions rather than grand gestures. It's the accumulation of tiny moments when you choose compassion over criticism, when you notice you're being harsh with yourself and consciously soften your inner voice, when you catch yourself in self-judgment and ask, would I speak this way to someone I love? Would I be this cruel to a frightened child? Neuroscience research on neuroplasticity has shown that consistent practice of self-compassion literally changes brain structure. Studies using fMRI scans show that self-compassion practices increase activity in brain regions associated with caregiving and emotional regulation, while decreasing activity in regions associated with self-criticism and rumination. You're not just thinking differently, you're rewiring the actual neural networks that generate your experience of self. That means allowing your emotions to exist without immediately trying to fix them, solve them, or make them go away. When sadness arises, instead of pushing it down or distracting yourself, you practice saying internally, I feel sad right now, and that's okay. Sadness is allowed. I can hold this feeling. When anger emerges, instead of shaming yourself for being difficult or demanding you practice curiosity, what is this anger trying to protect? What boundary has been violated? What does this part of me need? It means staying present with discomfort instead of abandoning yourself to distraction, numbing through substances or behaviors or compulsive productivity that keeps you from feeling anything at all. the inner parent learns to say, I know this is uncomfortable. I'm staying with you anyway. You don't have to go through this alone. It means giving yourself permission to rest without having earned it through productivity. Permission to play without it being productive. Permission to not know the answers, to be uncertain, to be in process rather than already arrived. These aren't luxuries. These are necessities for a neglected inner child. They are the building blocks of self-trust and internal safety. As you develop this inner parent capacity, you also begin to recognize the voices you've internalized that don't actually belong to you. The one that says you're lazy for resting, when rest is actually biological necessity. The one that called you selfish for setting boundaries when boundaries are essential for healthy relationships. The one that insists you need to earn love through achievement when love should be a freely given recognition of your inherent worth. When you awaken the inner parent, you don't argue with these voices or try to destroy them. You gently, firmly unlearn them. You replace them with voices rooted in reality rather than fear. A voice that says, you are allowed to exist as you are. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to have limits. You are allowed to be imperfect and still worthy of care. Carl Jung believed deeply that integration was the path to wholeness, not perfection, but integration. To integrate the inner child is to give them a place in your life again. Not to silence them or override them with adult logic, but to listen to understand what that part of you still needs to honor their wisdom, even when it comes wrapped in emotion rather than reason. Sometimes what they need is validation. Someone to acknowledge that, yes, that hurt, that wasn't fair, that shouldn't have happened. Sometimes they need rest permission to stop performing and just be. Sometimes they need the courage to speak their truth, to say what's been left unsaid for years. And when the adult part of you learns how to respond with presence instead of pressure, with acceptance instead of demands for immediate change, that's when healing begins to feel real and sustainable. That's when the child no longer has to scream to be heard. They can whisper, and you'll listen. One powerful practice in this journey through psychology for sleep and self-discovery is to imagine sitting down with your younger self, not to give them advice or tell them about the future or reassure them that everything will work out, but simply to be there, to say, I see you. I'm here now. You never deserved what happened to you, and you never had to become someone else to be loved. You were always enough exactly as you were. When you engage in this practice, whether through journaling, meditation, or simply quiet reflection, you're not just imagining, you're rewriting a story. You're giving your nervous system a new ending, one where love doesn't come with conditions, where worth isn't something that has to be earned, where you are met with presence instead of abandonment. And here's the most radical truth, the one that changes everything. The inner parent is not some distant ideal you have to develop from scratch. It's already inside you. Every time you listen to yourself with patience instead of criticism, you awaken it. Every time you choose rest over punishment, you strengthen it. Every time you speak with kindness to a part of yourself that once felt shame, you embody it. Reparenting doesn't happen in a single breakthrough moment, though there may be significant turning points along the way. It happens in small, steady acts of self-respect. It happens when you stop expecting the world to finally give you what you missed, and instead begin giving it to yourself. You stop living an emotional debt, waiting for someone to pay back what was taken from you. You stop waiting to be rescued by a partner, a therapist, a friend, or some future version of yourself who finally has it all figured out. You begin rising not because someone lifted you, but because you are no longer abandoning yourself in the ways you once were. You are no longer leaving yourself behind in the quest to be acceptable to others. And that right there is the foundation of true self-worth. Not worth based on what you achieve or how others perceive you, but worth rooted in your relationship with yourself, in your capacity to show up for your own needs with consistency and care. You were never asking for too much when you needed presence, safety, unconditional acceptance. Those are basic human needs, especially in childhood. But if you didn't receive them, then you can begin offering them now, not as consolation prize, but as genuine nourishment. The child within you doesn't need to be fixed. They need to be freed. Freed from the shame that was never theirs to carry. Freed from the belief that they had to earn love. Freed from the exhausting work of performing worth. And you, the adult, reading these words in this quiet space, you are the only one who can offer that freedom, not by doing more or becoming more, but by turning toward the child within with the same tenderness you would offer any wounded being, with patience, with presence, with the revolutionary message that they are enough, they always were, and they don't have to change to deserve your love. This is the work. This is the path. And though it's not easy, though it requires facing pain you've long avoided, though it demands a kind of courage that our culture rarely celebrates, it is the most important work you will ever do. Because when you learn to reparent yourself, when you become the safe, steady presence the child within has been waiting for, everything changes. Not all at once, not perfectly, but genuinely, deeply, transformatively. You stop needing the world to be different and start being different in the world. You stop waiting for permission to be yourself and start giving that permission from within. You stop performing for love and start living from love. The love you finally, at long last, are learning to give yourself. The parts of yourself that you've been taught to hide, to suppress, to be ashamed of, those aren't flaws. They're fragments. Pieces of a self you were once told were too much, too needy, too emotional, too strange, too sensitive, too intense, or too difficult. But those pieces didn't disappear when you learned to hide them. They didn't cease to exist when you pushed them down, when you performed the opposite qualities, when you built your persona around being easy, agreeable, and acceptable. They became what Carl Jung called the shadow, the unconscious aspect of the personality that the conscious ego doesn't identify with. And what Jung taught us, what he spent his entire career trying to help people understand through decades of clinical work and personal exploration, is that the shadow isn't evil. It isn't evidence of your moral failure or psychological deficiency or some fundamental flaw in your character. The shadow is simply what you're unconscious of, what you've disowned in order to survive, to be loved, to stay safe in environments that couldn't hold your full humanity. What you've pushed down, denied, rejected about yourself. Because acknowledging those parts felt too dangerous. too risky, too likely to result in abandonment. Jung discovered the shadow through his own painful inner work, documented in what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period of intense psychological exploration that nearly drove him to breakdown, but ultimately became the foundation for his entire theoretical system. He learned that the shadow grows in proportion to the light we try to project. The more we insist on being only good, only positive, only acceptable, the larger and more powerful the shadow becomes. In his work with patients, Jung observed a consistent pattern. The traits people most vehemently denied in themselves were often the very traits they couldn't stop seeing in others. The person who insisted they never felt anger would be consumed with rage at others' aggression. The individual who prided themselves on never being needy would be exhausted by others' emotional demands. This is projection, seeing in the outer world what we refuse to acknowledge in our inner world. And in that process of disowning and projecting a fundamental lie, took root and spread through your psyche like a vine. I'm only worthy if I hide these parts. I'm only lovable if I become someone other than who I actually am. I'm only acceptable if I edit out everything that might be too much, or not enough, too intense, or too quiet, too emotional, or too cold. The shadow work that Jung pioneered, that we're exploring in this journey of psychology for sleep and transformation, isn't about indulging every impulse or acting out every suppressed feeling. It's far more subtle and sophisticated than that. It's about bringing consciousness to what has been unconscious, about seeing clearly what you've been refusing to see, about reclaiming the energy you've been using to keep parts of yourself buried. Shadow work in this context of psychology for sleep and waking transformation is not about diving into darkness for the sake of drama or wallowing in pain for its own sake. It's about reclamation. It's about meeting the parts of yourself that were exiled for being too real, too honest, too alive. It's about learning that your anger had something important to say about your boundaries being violated, that your sadness was wisdom about loss and grief that needed to be honored, that your sensitivity was never the enemy. It was the radar that picked up what others pretended not to feel, the antenna receiving signals about emotional truth that were being denied. You may have been conditioned to believe that to have worth, you had to be endlessly kind, perpetually positive, agreeable to the point of self-abandonment, or useful to the point of self-exhaustion. But that's not self-worth. That's performance masquerading as virtue. That's the persona trying to earn love by hiding the shadow, and shadow work tears that mask off, not to humiliate you or expose you as somehow fraudulent, but to free you from the exhausting labor of hiding. True self-worth isn't built by stacking achievements on top of wounds, by piling accomplishments on unhealed pain, in the hope that the tower will grow tall enough to feel stable. It's built by descending into the places that hurt and offering them not pity, but compassion. Not to for you, but I see you and what happened to you makes sense, and you don't have to carry shame for surviving. The shadow often contains not just pain, but power. If you were shamed for being assertive, for stating your needs clearly, for taking up space, then your natural strength went underground. It didn't disappear. It became shadow. If you were punished for feeling joy, for being exuberant, for expressing delight, then your vibrancy was hidden away, labeled as dangerous or inappropriate. If you were told your emotions were too much, that your feelings were burdensome or manipulative, then your capacity to empathize deeply, to feel intensely, to connect authentically was muted and pushed into shadow. Shadow work helps you bring those gifts back into the light, not to show them off or prove anything to anyone, but to integrate them into your conscious personality, to become whole rather than fractured. Carl Jung wrote something that serves as a kind of manifesto for this work. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This isn't a call to drown in the past, to become consumed by your wounds, to identify so completely with your trauma that it becomes your entire identity. It's an invitation to explore what's unresolved with curiosity rather than judgment, and to offer it presence rather than continued exile. It's not about reliving your trauma in endless detail. It's about unlearning the shame that formed around it, like scar tissue hardening into the belief that you are fundamentally flawed. And here's the surprising truth that emerges from genuine shadow work in this practice of psychology for sleep and conscious living. The more you integrate your shadow, the more grounded your sense of self becomes. You stop outsourcing your worth to external validators. You stop needing to explain yourself constantly. You stop feeling fundamentally broken, like there's something wrong with you that you have to hide. You stop hiding because you're no longer afraid of who you are when no one's watching. The work is challenging, yes. It means facing guilt about things you've done, rage about things done to you, jealousy that reveals where you feel deprived, grief over what you've lost, shame about who you've been. It means sitting with the parts of yourself that feel unlovable and discovering that they're not unlovable at all. They're simply unloved, still waiting for someone to see them with compassion. But in doing this difficult work, you give these exiled parts a home. You become the parent to your own shadow, the one who can hold the emotions that once terrified you. And in that embrace, something powerful and unexpected happens. You begin to feel safe within yourself. That safety, not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of self-trust, is the foundation of true self-worth. Not perfection, not control, not having everything figured out, but integration. The wholeness that comes when you stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. When you stop editing yourself just to survive in a world that demands you be smaller, simpler, easier than you actually are. Shadow work at its heart is a path back to truth. It whispers sometimes gently and sometimes with fierce urgency. You were never too much. You were just too honest for a world still afraid of its own reflection. Your intensity wasn't the problem. It was a mirror showing others the feelings they'd learned to suppress. And once you accept that, once you allow your shadow a seat at the table of your consciousness, you stop trying desperately to prove your worth. You start living it. You stop looking for someone external to save you from yourself. You start becoming the someone you needed, the one who can look at all of you, light and dark strengths and struggles, and say, yes, this is who I am, and I am learning to love all of it. This is where healing transforms from concept to lived experience. Not by becoming someone new, not by finally fixing all your flaws, not by eliminating the parts that were once rejected, but by remembering who you were before the world told you to forget, before you learned that some parts of you were unacceptable, before you split yourself into the version you show and the version you hide. Shadow work is the integration of that split. It's the reunification of your fractured self. And with each piece you reclaim from the darkness, you become more whole, more real, more capable of genuine self-worth that doesn't depend on performance or external validation. You become, as Jung described, individuated, not perfect, not without struggle, but authentically yourself. And that, in the end, is what the inner child has been waiting for all along. Not for you to become flawless, but for you to become whole. Not for you to hide your humanity, but to embrace it fully. Not for you to earn worth through endless striving, but to recognize the worth that was always there, buried beneath layers of shame that were never yours to begin with. The shadow is not your enemy. It's your forgotten self waiting in the darkness to be welcomed home. Reclaiming your worth is not always loud or dramatic. It doesn't always announce itself with fanfare or crystallize in a single moment of perfect clarity. Sometimes, often, in fact, it begins quietly, like a whisper from within that you barely recognize at first, because it's been so long since you heard it. A feeling that rises up and says softly but firmly, I don't have to live like this anymore. Reclaiming your worth through this journey of psychology for sleep and waking consciousness is not about becoming perfect. It's not about fixing every flaw or resolving every wound or arriving at some final destination where you never struggle again. It's about becoming real, about returning to yourself after years of performing, adapting, editing, shrinking. And the signs that you're returning to your authentic self are subtle, powerful, and deeply transformative. Here are 10 signs to look for, each one a quiet revolution happening in your inner world. 1. You stop begging for love and start embodying it. You no longer chase people who make you feel invisible, who require you to diminish yourself to be acceptable, who can only see the version of you that serves their needs. You stop over-explaining your feelings to those who refuse to understand, who dismiss your experience, who make you question your own reality through gaslighting or subtle invalidation. And instead of trying desperately to earn love from sources that cannot give it freely, you begin to embody love from the inside out. This shift is subtle but profound. You realize that love isn't something external to be captured and held onto through perfect performance. It's an internal state, a way of relating to yourself, a frequency you can tune into regardless of external circumstances. You realize that love isn't something to bargain for, to perform, for it to make yourself smaller, to deserve. It's not a limited resource that others dispense based on your worthiness. It's something infinite that flows from being connected to your own essence, to the part of you that existed before you learned you had to earn everything. It's something to anchor in something that radiates naturally when you stop abandoning yourself for others' comfort. Something you offer not just to receive reciprocation, but because you've learned to generate it internally, to be the source of the very thing you once begged others to provide. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming a whole unto yourself, no longer dependent on external completion. 2. You're no longer afraid to disappoint people. The fear of rejection used to control every decision, every word, every action. You monitored yourself constantly, calibrating your responses to maximize approval and minimize conflict. But now, something stronger is guiding you: integrity, the commitment to your own truth, even when it conflicts with others' preferences. You understand that being true to yourself will sometimes let others down, will sometimes fail to meet their expectations, will sometimes create friction or distance, and you're okay with that because peace, genuine internal peace, is more valuable than the conditional approval of people who can only accept edited versions of who you are. Authenticity is worth the friction it may cause because the alternative is a lifetime of pretending, and you're done with that. 3. You stop shrinking in spaces that don't feel safe. You no longer make yourself small to be palatable. You don't dilute your personality, mute your voice, or hide your intelligence to avoid making others uncomfortable. If a space doesn't honor your truth, you either speak it clearly or leave without apology. You trust, perhaps for the first time, that the right people will meet you where you are not, where you've learned to hide. That genuine connection requires authenticity, and you're no longer willing to trade your realness for belonging that isn't actually real. 4. You start saying no without guilt and yes without fear. Your boundaries no longer feel like punishments you inflict on others or walls that prove you're cold and selfish. They feel like protection, like the appropriate limits that allow you to maintain your energy, your integrity, your well-being. You understand that boundaries aren't about being rigid or unkind. They're about being honest. The guilt that once accompanied every no begins to dissipate as you understand the fundamental truth. You are not responsible for managing other people's disappointment. When you set a boundary and someone gets upset, that's information about their expectations, not evidence of your failure. In fact, people who respond poorly to your boundaries are often revealing that they benefited from your lack of them. They preferred you without limits because your unlimited availability, energy, and resources served them. But relationships built on your self-abandonment aren't real. Relationships, they're arrangements where you trade your well-being for connection. That will dissolve the moment you stop sacrificing yourself. And your yes, when you offer it, is no longer driven by people-pleasing or fear of disappointing someone, but by genuine alignment, by an honest assessment of whether this commitment, this request, this opportunity actually serves your values and goals, or whether you'd be saying yes simply to avoid the discomfort of potential conflict or rejection. You begin to honor your energy like sacred currency, understanding that it's finite and precious. You don't give it to those who squander it, who take it for granted, who expect unlimited access without reciprocity or appreciation. You don't sacrifice your peace just to be perceived as agreeable or nice. Research on boundary setting shows that people with healthy boundaries actually have better relationships, not worse ones. Why? Because their connections are built on authenticity rather than resentment, on honest exchange rather than unbalanced giving. When you stop overgiving, the people who remain are those who actually value you, not just your utility. 5. You no longer seek validation. You listen to your inner knowing. Instead of asking, Do they approve? What will others think? How will this make me look? You ask, does this feel true to me? Does this align with who I actually am and what I actually value? You begin to consult your intuition before anyone else's opinion. You trust your gut more than the noise, more than the external voices telling you who you should be and what you should want. And even when you're uncertain, and you will be uncertain sometimes because life is complex and answers aren't always clear, you're willing to sit with that uncertainty without abandoning yourself, without immediately seeking someone else to tell you what to do. 6. You see your past not as shame, but as sacred data. The things you used to regret, the mistakes you once agonized over, the ways you once coped, that now seem unhealthy or misguided, you begin to see all of it differently. Not as evidence of your fundamental unworthiness or proof that you're broken, but as information about what you were experiencing and what resources you had available at the time. This reframe is crucial in the journey of psychology for sleep and transformation. Shame says, I should have known better. I should have been stronger. What's wrong with me that I made those choices? But compassionate understanding says, I was doing the best I could with what I knew and what I had. Those behaviors made sense in that context, even if they don't serve me anymore. Your wounds become wisdom when you stop judging them and start learning from them. That toxic relationship you stayed in for years, it taught you what you will no longer tolerate. That addiction or coping mechanism that nearly destroyed you, it showed you the depth of pain you were trying to escape. And surviving it revealed your resilience. Your struggles become teachers when you approach them with curiosity rather than contempt. Why did I develop that pattern? What was I trying to achieve? What need was I attempting to meet? These questions asked with genuine interest rather than self-attack unlock profound insights about your psychological landscape. You no longer beat yourself up for what you didn't know when you were younger, when you were surviving trauma, when you were using the only tools you had, even if those tools were destructive. You recognize that you were surviving, and that survival itself, the fact that you're here, reading these words, still breathing, still growing, still willing to look at yourself honestly, held its own kind of brilliance. Trauma therapists often say that there are no bad coping mechanisms, only ones that have outlived their usefulness. That defensive behavior that feels like a weakness. It kept you safe when safety was scarce. That emotional wall that now prevents intimacy. It protected you when vulnerability meant danger. The task isn't to shame yourself for building those protections. It's to thank them for their service and consciously decide whether you still need them. 7. You lose interest in proving yourself. You don't need to be louder, richer, more accomplished, more liked, or more perfect than you are. The compulsive drive to demonstrate your worth begins to fade because you're discovering worth as something inherent rather than earned. You're okay simply being. Your presence is no longer a performance designed to impress. It's an offering, a genuine showing up as whoever you actually are in this moment. You're not trying to be impressive anymore. You're trying to be whole. And that shift from proving to being changes absolutely everything about how you move through the world. 8. You begin to protect your peace like it's oxygen, the chaos you used to tolerate, the drama you once got pulled into, the dysfunction that felt normal. because it was familiar, all of it becomes unbearable. Not in a judgmental way, where you're looking down on others, but in a clear seeing way, where you simply recognize this disturbs my equilibrium, and I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my stability for connection that requires chaos. This shift often surprises people because it happens gradually, then suddenly. You realize you're no longer willing to engage in the circular arguments that go nowhere. You notice yourself declining invitations to situations that leave you depleted. You find yourself creating distance from relationships that demand you be smaller, louder, different than you are to maintain them. You stop returning to situations and dynamics that disturb your internal equilibrium. You decline invitations to emotional warfare. Those interactions where someone wants to pull you into their drama, to make you responsible for their feelings, to engage in the kind of circular processing that never resolves anything but keeps everyone activated and enmeshed. You no longer find comfort in dysfunction simply because it's what you know, because it feels like home in that sad, familiar way. You start to recognize that comfort and familiarity aren't the same thing. Something can feel familiar and still be deeply harmful. The chaos might feel like home, but that doesn't mean it's where you should live. Peace becomes your new home, your baseline, the state you're committed to maintaining and protecting. And you're willing to disappoint people to be misunderstood, to be called changed, or difficult, or selfish, in order to protect it, because you finally understand at a visceral level that without peace, nothing else works. Without internal stability, all your achievements, all your relationships, all your activities become sources of depletion rather than nourishment. This doesn't mean you avoid all difficulty or challenge. It means you distinguish between productive discomfort, the kind that comes from growth and healing, and destructive chaos that serves no purpose except to keep you off balance and reactive. You learn to ask, is this situation helping me grow, or is it just keeping me distracted from my own life? 9. You grieve deeply and without shame. Reclaiming your worth isn't only celebration and triumph and empowered boundary setting. It's also necessarily a process of mourning, and this mourning is essential, not optional. You cannot fully heal without grieving what was lost. You grieve who you had to be to survive the masks you wore that became so convincing. You sometimes forgot they were masks. The pieces of yourself you abandoned, leaving them behind, like breadcrumbs that you hoped would lead you back. But that dissolved in the rain of time and adaptation. The years, perhaps decades, you spent trying to earn what should have been freely given, what every child deserves, simply by existing. You grieve what you lost the childhood that should have been safer, more stable, more attuned to who you actually were, instead of who you needed to become. The acceptance you deserved but didn't receive. The unconditional love that was your birthright but was withheld, made conditional, or given so inconsistently that you learned to tout its reality. Contemporary grief theory, particularly the work of researchers like Kenneth Doka, recognizes what they call disenfranchised grief. Grief that isn't socially acknowledged or validated. Grieving your childhood when your childhood didn't involve obvious trauma, when your parents did their best, when things could have been worse. This is disenfranchised grief. Our culture doesn't always make space for it, but Jung understood that psychological healing requires mourning. In his work on the individuation process, he wrote about the necessity of facing and integrating loss, not bypassing it with gratitude or spiritual platitudes, but actually feeling the full weight of what was missing, what was taken, what never had a chance to develop. And you cry, not because you're weak or stuck in the past or refusing to move on, but because you're finally safe enough to feel. Because tears are how the body releases what cannot be spoken, how the nervous system processes overwhelming emotion, how the soul acknowledges truth that the mind has been denying. Every tear becomes a kind of baptism in this journey of psychology. For sleep and awakening, washing away the accumulated pain, helping you return to something closer, to your original self, the self that existed before all the wounding, before all the adaptation, before you learned that your authentic expression was somehow problematic. Then, you start to feel like you're coming home to yourself. This is perhaps the most unmistakable sign of all, a sense of familiarity, a warmth, a recognition, a feeling that you don't need to perform, escape, or explain. You belong with yourself. You're okay in your own company. The frantic quality of seeking external validation begins to quiet. And for the first time, maybe in years, maybe in your entire life, that's enough. You're enough. Not because you finally achieved everything, or fixed everything, or become everything you thought you needed to be, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself, because you're learning to stay, to be present, to offer yourself the same patience and compassion you've always offered others. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And reclaiming your worth is precisely that, a return to the self you were always meant to be. Not the one molded by shame, not the one shaped by fear or contorted to fit others' expectations, but the one who remembers at a cellular level your inherent value, unearned, undiminished by mistakes or struggles, utterly, completely yours. You may still have days when you forget, when the old patterns resurface, when the inner critic gets loud again, when you slip back into seeking approval from sources that cannot give what you need. That's okay. That's human. That's part of the process. Worth is not a final destination you reach and then maintain effortlessly. It's a relationship you keep returning to, a practice you continue engaging, a commitment you renew again and again. The commitment to see yourself clearly, to treat yourself kindly, to honor your needs without apology. And each time you return, each time you catch yourself people-pleasing and redirect toward authenticity, each time you notice the pattern and choose differently, you make that connection just a little more unshakable. In this ongoing practice of psychology for sleep and conscious living, you're building something profound, a self-worth that doesn't crumble under criticism, that doesn't require constant external reinforcement, that exists as a steady foundation beneath all the changing circumstances of your life. You were never unworthy. You were simply unheard, unseen, unmet in the ways that mattered most. But now you're listening. Now you're seeing. Now you're learning to meet yourself with the presence that was always your deepest need. And that changes everything. You were never unworthy, just unheard. Let these words settle into you as we return to where we began, to that threshold between night and day, between sleep and waking, between the self you've been and the self you're becoming. You were never broken, never lacking, never fundamentally less than. But somewhere along the line, in the vulnerability of childhood, when you had no defenses and no ability to understand what was happening, you were made to feel that way. Maybe it was the silence of those who should have protected you, who should have seen you, who should have made you feel safe enough to be exactly who you were. Maybe it was the weight of conditional love, the kind that only showed up when you behaved correctly, performed adequately, or remained conveniently small and undemanding. Or maybe it was harsh words that sank into your bones like stones into water, settling at the bottom of your consciousness, where they've remained for years, decades, shaping how you see yourself even now. But hear this truth as clearly as you've heard anything in this journey through psychology for sleep. You were never unworthy. You were just unheard in the ways that mattered, unseen in your authentic complexity, your full humanity, unmet in your emotional truth, in the legitimate needs that every child has, unheld in your deepest pain and confusion, left to navigate overwhelming experiences alone when you should have had a compassionate witness. And when a child feels unheard, when their authentic self is met with rejection or indifference or conditional acceptance, when their emotional reality is dismissed or minimized, they begin to believe something devastating, that their feelings don't matter, that their presence is burdensome, that their needs should be smaller, quieter, less demanding. So you learn to silence yourself before anyone else could silence you, developing an internal censor that was even harsher than the external critics. You adapted with remarkable speed and efficiency, becoming whatever others needed you to be: the easy child, the responsible one, the helper, the achiever, the invisible one. And in doing so, you drifted further and further from your own truth, from the child within who simply wanted to be seen and accepted exactly as they were, without editing, without performance, without the exhausting labor of being acceptable. But healing begins not in some distant future, when you've accumulated enough achievements or enough therapy hours or enough spiritual insights, but right here, right now, in this very moment. It begins when you stop waiting for the world to finally listen and start listening to yourself with the quality of attention you've always deserved. When you sit with the parts of you that were ignored for so long, offering them not solutions, but presence. When you validate the emotions you were told to hide, the anger that was called inappropriate, the sadness that was labeled self-pity, the fear that was dismissed as a weakness. When you give voice to the pain you buried for years, just to survive, just to maintain some thread of connection, just to make it through another day without completely falling apart. That's when your self-worth begins to rise. Not because someone else finally sees you, but because you are seeing yourself. Not because external validation arrives, but because internal recognition emerges. Reclaiming your worth is not about fixing what's broken, because you were never broken. It's about reconnecting with what's been buried, with what's been exiled, with what's been waiting patiently in the shadows for you to turn around and finally notice. It's about honoring the child within, who never asked for too much. They only asked for what they needed. for presence, for safety, for the kind of love that doesn't have to be earned, that doesn't come with conditions, that simply is. It's about saying to that child, finally, what no one else ever did. I hear you. I believe you. You matter. Your feelings are valid. Your needs are legitimate. And you never had to become someone else to deserve love. Carl Jung once wrote, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Ah, these words carry profound weight in this moment because they remind us that while we cannot change the past, cannot undo the wounds, cannot make our childhood different than it was, we can absolutely change our relationship to what happened. We can choose how we hold our history, how we interpret our experiences, how we move forward from this point. The past is fixed, but its meaning is fluid. You can spend your entire life proving that the critical voice was wrong, trying to achieve your way out of unworthiness, performing worth for an audience that will never be satisfied. Or you can recognize that the voice was never yours. To begin with, it was inherited, absorbed, internalized from people who were themselves wounded, from systems that profit from your insecurity, from a culture that confuses performance with value. So choose now, not in some distant future, when you've finally healed completely, or fixed all your patterns, or resolved every wound, but right now, in this quiet darkness, where no one can see you perform, and you don't need to pretend for anyone, including yourself. Choose to become the version of you that no longer whispers to be accepted, that no longer contorts yourself into shapes that don't fit your soul just to avoid rejection. Choose to be the one who listens deeply to your own inner voice with the same reverence you once reserved for others' opinions, who takes your own needs as seriously as you take everyone else's, who protects your own peace with the same vigilance you once used to protect others' comfort at your own expense. Choose to be the one who doesn't trade authenticity for belonging, because you're learning slowly but surely that belonging that requires you to be false isn't belonging at all. It's just another form of exile, another way of being separated from your own truth. Real belonging, Jung taught, comes from being whole within yourself, not from finding external completion. Because here's what this entire exploration through psychology for sleep has been building toward. The most powerful thing you can do is not to convince the world you're worthy. The most revolutionary act is to stop asking for permission to be yourself in the first place. You were never unworthy. You were simply unheard. The world around you was too noisy, with its own pain, too distracted by its own survival, too caught in its own patterns to truly hear what you were saying, what you were feeling, what you were needing. But now, in this moment, in this quiet space between waking and sleep, you are listening. You are finally at long last turning toward yourself with the attention, the patience, the compassion that was always your birthright. And so we return to that image of the threshold, that doorway between night and day. The mist still clings to the earth. The world still holds its breath in that suspended moment before dawn. But you are different now. You've walked through shadows and faced what you found there. You've looked into mirrors that showed you not just who you've become, but who you were forced to become. You've heard voices, your own authentic voice, beneath all the noise, beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the years of trying to be acceptable. And the child within the one who has been asking, Am I enough? For so many years, in so many ways, they're quieter now. Not because they've given up or been silenced, but because they finally heard the answer. You always were enough. From your very first breath, from the moment consciousness first flickered within you, from before you had language or memory or any concept of worthiness, you were enough simply because you existed, because your consciousness is unrepeatable and irreplaceable in all of human history, because your being itself has inherent value that nothing, no mistake, no failure, no rejection, no wound can diminish or erase. This isn't a platitude. This isn't positive thinking or spiritual bypassing. This is the fundamental truth that got buried under layers of conditioning, under years of learning that worth was something external to be earned rather than something internal to be remembered. You were born whole. Healing is remembering that wholeness, not creating it. Returning to it, not achieving it. The path ahead remains uncertain, and that's okay. In fact, that's more than okay. That's honest. The work of integration continues because you're a living, growing being, not a problem to be permanently solved. There will be moments when you forget your worth, when old patterns resurface like familiar ghosts, when you slip back into performing or seeking validation, or abandoning yourself in small ways you don't immediately notice. But now, you know the way home. Now you have a practice, a living relationship with yourself that you can return to no matter how many times you drift away. Now you understand at a bone-deep level that healing isn't a destination you reach and then maintain effortlessly forever. It's a direction you choose again and again. It's an ongoing commitment, renewed daily, hourly, moment by moment. The commitment to see yourself clearly without harsh judgment, to treat yourself kindly, even when you stumble, to honor your needs without apology or justification. May you find your way home to yourself, not as a distant destination marked on some future map, but as a daily return to presence, to truth, to the part of you that never needed to prove anything, not as perfection that must be achieved through relentless self-improvement, but as presence that can be practiced right here, right now, in this very breath, not as something you have to earn through years of spiritual work or therapy or achievement, but as something you remember like a song you once knew by heart, but had forgotten until someone hummed the first few notes. The child is waiting, and they've been waiting for you, specifically for you, the adult you've become, the one with resources and choices, and the capacity to offer what was once missing. They don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to have all the answers. They don't need you to fix everything or become someone other than who you are. They simply need you to stay, to be present, to listen, to offer the unconditional acceptance that every child deserves, and that this child, your child, the one within, has been waiting for all along. Take a breath. Feel the rise and fall of your chest. Notice that you're here alive, still becoming. The journey continues, but you're no longer walking it alone. You have yourself. Finally, completely, unshakably. And in this quiet space of psychology, for sleep, as the world outside prepares for another dawn, as your body prepares for rest, let this truth be the last thing you hear. You are enough. You always were, and you always will be. May sleep find you gently. May rest restore you. May you wake tomorrow a little more whole, a little more free, a little more willing to live from the truth of your inherent worth, rather than from the lie of having to earn it. The child within is home, and so are you. Home is not a place you've been searching for outside yourself, not in another person's approval, not in the next achievement, not in some future version of yourself who finally has everything figured out. Home is the felt sense of belonging within your own being, the capacity to be present with yourself in all your complexity, the radical acceptance that you are exactly where you need to be in your own unfolding. Jung spent his entire life exploring the question of what it means to become whole, to individuate, to return to the self. And what he discovered, what he tried to teach through his work with thousands of patients and his own courageous descent into the unconscious, is that we don't become whole by adding more achievements, more knowledge, more spiritual practices, more healing modalities. We become whole by integrating what we've fragmented, by bringing back into consciousness what we've pushed into shadow, by welcoming home the exiled parts of ourselves that we once believed were too dangerous, too shameful, too much to be accepted. Wholeness is a return, not an arrival, a remembering, not a becoming. In this space of psychology for sleep, as the world outside prepares for another dawn, as your body prepares to release into rest, as your nervous system begins to downregulate from the activation of the day, let this truth settle into your bones, not just as an idea, but as a lived reality. You are enough. You always were, and you always will be. Not because you've achieved enough, or healed enough, or become spiritually awakened enough, but because worth is intrinsic to existence itself. Because you are a manifestation of consciousness in human form, and that alone makes you precious, valuable, worthy of care, including especially your own care. May sleep find you gently tonight, wrapping around you like the embrace you always needed. May rest restore the parts of you that are tired from trying, from performing, from proving. May you wake tomorrow a little more whole, a little more free, a little more willing to live from the truth of your inherent worth, rather than from the exhausting lie that you have to earn your right to exist, to need to take up space in this world. The child within is home. The journey continues, but you're no longer walking it fragmented and alone. You have yourself, all of yourself, the light and the shadow, the strength and the vulnerability, the achievements and the wounds. And in that wholeness, however imperfect, however incomplete, however still in process it may be, there is finally, peace. Good night. Rest well. You've done enough. You are enough. And that has always been true, even in the moments when you couldn't feel it, couldn't believe, it couldn't remember it. Even then, especially then, it was true.